Late afternoon, Johannesburg. The sun was still hanging above the buildings, the kind of quiet light that makes everything look slower than it really is. On the small wooden table near the window, a phone vibrated once. Then again, no ringtone, just that short mechanical buzz. Connie Chiume was sitting a few steps away, not looking at it. The room was quiet enough that the vibration sounded louder than it should have. Buzz. Pause. Buzz. The message was already there. From the doctor. Only 2 lines. But she didn't reach for the phone. Not immediately. 10 seconds passed. Then another 30. Outside, a taxi stopped. Someone laughed somewhere down the street. A dog barked twice. Inside the room, nothing moved. She finally stood up. Slowly. Not because she was afraid of the message. Maybe because she already knew what it would say. Actors learn to read faces. Doctors' voices too. And the way silence stretches after certain words are spoken. Diagnosis. Tests. More tests. That pause doctors use when they choose the gentlest sentence they can find. Her fingers hovered above the phone screen. For a moment it looked almost absurd. After decades of theater lights, film sets, costumes, rehearsals that lasted past midnight, everything reduced to a small rectangle of light on a table. She unlocked it. The message didn't explain much. It didn't need to. A few clinical words, a recommendation for immediate treatment, and one sentence that quietly rearranged the future. Connie read it once. Then again. No dramatic reaction. No tears. Just a long breath. The kind that empties the room. Somewhere in the apartment, an old television was still on mute. Images moving silently across the screen. An actor running, someone crying, someone shouting. Scenes she had performed hundreds of times herself. But the strange thing about real life, it refuses to follow the script. She placed the phone down again, face down this time. For a while, she simply sat there, looking at the window. The light had shifted slightly, painting the wall with a softer shade of orange. Johannesburg continued its afternoon routine. Cars, voices, a distant radio. The city had no idea that somewhere inside a quiet apartment, one of its most familiar faces had just received a message that would slowly close the door on a lifetime of performances. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly. Later that evening, she opened an old drawer. Inside it were photographs, some slightly bent, some still perfectly flat. A younger Connie on stage, arms raised, a theater crowd blurred behind the flash. Another photo from a film set. Makeup lights, people holding microphones and cables, someone laughing just outside the frame. And another one, years later. A red carpet, bright cameras, applause. She stared at that photo a little longer. Because applause has a strange echo. You never realize how loud it is until the room becomes silent. Her hand rested on the edge of the drawer. There was no announcement yet. No press release. No public statement. Just that message. And a quiet understanding slowly settling in the room. Doctors would talk about treatment schedules. Friends would eventually call. Directors might ask if she was available for one more role. But right now, none of that had happened yet. Only the beginning of a realization. Some careers end with fireworks, standing ovations, curtains closing while the audience rises to its feet. This one did not feel like that. It felt smaller, more private, more human. A phone message, a chair near the window, a woman who had spent decades bringing characters to life suddenly sitting very still, trying to understand what life was asking from her now. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken. Johannesburg evenings come quickly. Lights turned on across the street. Someone started playing music from a balcony. Connie walked back to the table. The phone was still there, still silent. She turned it over, looked at the message one more time. For a few seconds, it almost looked like she might delete it. But she didn't. Instead, she opened her gallery. Thousands of images. Film posters. Behind-the-scenes photos. Moments from premieres. Selfies with younger actors who had grown up watching her work. Faces smiling into cameras. Moments frozen in time. She scrolled slowly, not searching for anything specific. Just remembering. A theater stage in Durban. A small television studio from the early 90s. The first time someone recognized her in a supermarket. A director shouting, "Cut!" while the entire crew burst into laughter. Fragments of a life spent inside stories. And now, a different kind of story had begun. Not written, not rehearsed. No script supervisor, no retakes. Only time moving forward the way it always does. Uninterrupted. She closed the gallery. The room had grown darker now, street lights reflecting softly through the window. For a moment she placed the phone in her pocket, almost like someone preparing to leave. But she didn't move. Instead, she stood there quietly, looking at the empty chair across the table, as if someone might walk in and say, "This was all a misunderstanding." But the room stayed silent, and somewhere in the city night had already begun to settle. A theater not far away was preparing for a show. Stage lights warming up, actors rehearsing their lines backstage, someone adjusting a microphone. The curtain would rise soon. The audience would clap. And somewhere else in Johannesburg, Connie Chiume was standing in a quiet apartment, holding a phone, with a message still glowing softly on the screen. No press conference, no reporters waiting outside a hospital door. Nothing like the scenes people imagine when famous names receive serious news. It happened in a room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper. A chair, a desk, 2 cups of tea that neither of them finished. The doctor spoke carefully, not whispering, not dramatic, just slow. Every word measured as if he was placing small stones across a river. Connie listened. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. She had heard doctors speak before. Everyone has. But there is a different weight when the sentence is meant for you. Not a character. Not a role. You! The doctor paused once, long enough that the air seemed to thicken. Outside the window, a nurse pushed a cart down the hallway. Metal wheels. A soft rattling sound. Then silence again. Connie nodded. Once, not because she understood everything, but because sometimes nodding is the only thing a person can do when language stops making sense. The doctor kept talking. Treatment. Possibilities. Time. Words like that. Words that sound technical but feel strangely personal. At one point he stopped and asked softly, "Do you have someone with you today?" Connie smiled. Not a sad smile, just polite. "No," she said. And that was the truth. No manager. No assistant. No family member waiting outside the door. Just Connie and a quiet room where life had suddenly shifted direction. After the conversation ended, the doctor stood up. He didn't rush her. Doctors learn that too. When to stop speaking. He left the room for a moment, maybe to give her space, maybe to pretend paperwork needed attention. Connie stayed seated. The chair was surprisingly comfortable. She noticed strange details. The ticking clock on the wall, a calendar with a beach photograph, a tiny crack running along the edge of the desk. The mind does that sometimes. It focuses on small things when something large is happening. She stood up eventually, walked to the window. Johannesburg looked exactly the same. Cars, pedestrians, a delivery truck double-parked near the entrance. Life continuing with absolute indifference. She almost laughed at that. Not out loud, just the quiet kind of laugh that never reaches the mouth. 40 years of acting, stages filled with light, crowds cheering, directors shouting instructions. And now the most important conversation of her life had happened in a room where the loudest sound was a clock. Tick, tick, tick. When the doctor returned, he handed her a folder. Thin. Too thin for something that felt this heavy. "Take your time," he said. She thanked him. Her voice sounded normal. That surprised her. Outside the room, the hallway felt brighter. Hospital lights always do that. Too white, too honest. People passed by. A young couple arguing softly near the elevator. An elderly man reading a newspaper. A child holding a balloon that bobbed gently in the air. No one looked at her twice. Fame is strange like that. On stage, you are larger than life. In a hospital hallway, you are simply another person holding a folder. Connie walked slowly toward the exit. The automatic doors opened with a soft mechanical sigh. Warm air greeted her outside. The afternoon sun had shifted lower now. Traffic noise returned. City sounds. Normal sounds. She stood there for a moment without moving. Not because she didn't know where to go. just because something inside her needed to pause. She opened the folder. Read the first page. Closed it again. Some stories don't need to be read twice. A car passed. Then another. Across the street, someone was selling fruit from a small wooden stand. Bright oranges. Green mangoes. Color everywhere. She watched a customer laugh with the vendor. Life continuing. Ordinary. Unaware. That quiet realization settled slowly in her chest. There would be no dramatic announcement tonight. No television headline. No studio lights. Just a woman who had spent decades becoming other people now returning home with a story she never auditioned for. Later that evening, her phone began to ring. Not because anyone knew, just the usual rhythm of life. A director asking about a rehearsal next month. A younger actress sending a voice note full of excitement about a new project. Someone inviting her to a small theater event in Cape Town. Connie listened to the messages, one after another. Her thumb hovered above the reply button. For a long moment, she didn't respond. How do you explain something that has barely become real even to you? She placed the phone down. The apartment felt quieter tonight. Not empty. Just different. She walked into the living room where a shelf held dozens of small awards and framed posters. A career built slowly, year by year, roll by roll. One particular poster caught her eye. An old theater production. The colors slightly faded. Her name printed boldly across the top. She traced the edge of the frame with her finger. 40 years surrounded by applause. 40 years of audiences breathing in unison in dark theaters. 40 years of noise. And now, this silence. Not the comfortable silence of rehearsal halls before the curtain rises. A different one. Heavier. Unfamiliar. She sat down on the couch. Across the room, a lamp flickered softly. Night had already wrapped itself around the city outside. Somewhere far away, music drifted through an open window. Connie leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment. Not sleeping, just listening. Listening to the quiet. A quiet she had rarely known. Because for most of her life, there had always been something else. Applause. Laughter. Dialogue echoing across a stage. But tonight, in a small apartment in Johannesburg, there was only the slow rhythm of breathing, and the faint glow of a phone screen on the table, waiting for a reply that had not been written yet. Later that night, the apartment felt different again. Not darker, just fuller. Memories do that. They enter quietly, like people slipping into a theater before the lights go down. Connie was sitting near the bookshelf when something caught her eye. A folded piece of fabric inside a small box. She opened it. An old costume, not expensive, not glamorous. The color had faded a little, and one of the sleeves had been repaired with thread that didn't quite match. A theater costume from years ago. Soweto. A small stage. The kind of stage where the wooden floor creaks when someone walks too quickly. She held the fabric for a moment, and suddenly she could hear it again. The backstage noise. Someone whispering lines. Someone laughing too loudly. The director clapping hands once and saying, "Places, everyone." That theater had been small, really small. The audience sat so close you could see every expression on their faces. Sometimes you could even hear someone chewing gum in the second row. Connie loved that place, not because it was famous, because it was honest. No giant spotlights, no cameras, just actors and breath and silence waiting to be broken. She remembered one night very clearly. The power had gone out during rehearsal. Total darkness. Someone lit 2 candles. The director shrugged and said, "Well, we continue." And they did, actors moving slowly through shadows, voices floating in candlelight. The audience later said it felt magical. But backstage, everyone had simply been trying not to trip over the furniture. Connie smiled slightly at that memory. The costume still smelled faintly of dust and stage makeup. She folded it again carefully. But the memories didn't stop. They rarely do once they begin. Another image surfaced. A film set somewhere outside Durban. Wind blowing so hard that microphones kept picking it up. The crew frustrated. The sun disappearing behind clouds every 5 minutes. Someone suggested they postpone the scene. Connie had simply stood there in the middle of the chaos. Waiting. Patient. She had always been good at waiting. Actors learn that skill quickly. waiting for the light to change, waiting for the camera to reset, waiting for the right emotion to arrive exactly when the director calls action. Someone on that set had once asked her a question. It was a young actor, nervous, holding a script that looked brand new. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked. The question had been sincere, almost worried. Connie remembered laughing softly, not mocking him, just amused. "Tired?" she repeated. Then she looked around at the crew, the cameras, the cables stretched across the ground, and she said something simple. "This is where I breathe." The young actor nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Years later, she saw him again on television. More confident, less nervous. That happens too. Careers moving forward quietly while no one is watching. Another memory. A long night shoot. The kind where the entire crew starts losing track of time. Coffee cups everywhere. People wrapped in jackets between takes. One by one, the crew began packing up. Lights shutting off. Equipment rolling into trucks. Actors leaving with quick goodbyes. But Connie stayed. She often did. Someone once joked about it. Connie is always the last one to leave. And it was true. Even when the cameras stopped. Even when the director had already gone home. She would still be there sometimes, standing on the empty set, looking at the place where the story had just happened. Not in a sad way. More like someone appreciating the silence after music ends. She liked that silence. It felt respectful, as if the room itself needed time to remember what had just been created inside it. Back in the apartment, she walked slowly to the window. Johannesburg was quieter now. Night deeper. Traffic softer. Somewhere a motorcycle passed quickly and disappeared. She leaned her forehead lightly against the cool glass. More fragments surfaced. A dressing room mirror with cracked corners. The smell of powder and hairspray. A stage manager whispering, 2 minutes. The weight of an audience waiting beyond a curtain. Those moments never appeared in interviews. Reporters usually asked about awards, famous roles, big premieres. But the real life of an actor lived inside smaller memories, like the sound of shoes tapping nervously backstage, or someone forgetting a line and improvising beautifully, or the moment when the entire cast realizes the audience is completely with them. Breathing together, listening, trusting. Connie closed her eyes. For a second she could almost hear applause again. Not loud, just distant, like waves reaching a shore far away. She opened her eyes slowly. The apartment returned, the lamp, the quiet table, the phone still resting where she had left it earlier. For a moment she wondered about all those stages, all those sets, all those places that had held pieces of her life. Some of them probably still standing, some already gone. Theater buildings replaced, film locations changed. But the memories, those stayed strangely clear. And somewhere in Soweto tonight, a small theater might still be rehearsing under warm lights. An actor might be standing in the wings, listening to the audience settle into their seats, heart beating fast, waiting for the cue to step onto the stage. Connie stood quietly in the dim room, her hand resting on the windowsill, thinking about those stages, those long nights, those moments when everyone else had gone home and she had remained behind for just a little while longer, inside the quiet space, where stories had once come alive. The night moved slowly. Almost carefully. Connie sat on the edge of the couch, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. The lamp hummed softly, a sound so quiet most people would never notice it. But tonight she heard everything, every small sound, every pause between sounds, a message, a diagnosis, a sentence that refused to settle neatly inside the mind. Some news arrives loudly. Headlines, phones ringing, people rushing in. This one didn't. It arrived quietly, like dust landing on a shelf. And yet, everything shifted. Connie leaned back, closed her eyes. For a second she imagined a stage again. Not a real one. Just the idea of it. Curtains. A spotlight waiting to turn on. But there was no stage tonight. Only a living room. A quiet apartment in Johannesburg. And a woman who had spent decades pretending to be other people, now trying to understand how to simply be herself. It felt strange. Actors rehearse emotions. They study them, break them down, Repeat them until they feel natural. But this was not rehearsed. No director. No script supervisor whispering reminders. Just life, messy, unbalanced, unpredictable. She stood up suddenly, walked toward the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, closed it again. She wasn't hungry, just moving. Sometimes movement is easier than thinking. On the table, the phone lit up again. Another message from someone asking about a rehearsal next week. She read it, then locked the screen. No reply. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Or maybe never. The future had become blurry. Not dark, just uncertain. Connie walked back into the living room, her footsteps slow, measured. She stopped near the shelf again. Awards lined up quietly. Small statues, frames, memories frozen into objects. She picked one up, turned it slightly under the light. Dust along the edge. That surprised her. She laughed softly. 40 years of work, and dust still finds its way in. Life is like that. You build something carefully, and time slowly settles over it. A pause. A long one. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. Then silence again. She remembered something suddenly. A line from an old play. She had delivered it hundreds of times. Maybe thousands. The line was simple. Not every ending announces itself. She used to say it slowly, looking directly at the audience. People always went quiet after that line. The silence felt important. Tonight that line returned, unexpected, and strangely accurate. Not every ending arrives like thunder. Some arrive like this, a phone vibrating on a wooden table, a doctor choosing his words carefully, an evening where the air suddenly feels heavier. Connie walked to the window again. The glass reflected her faintly. Older now, lines on the face that cameras once softened with makeup. But the eyes, the same eyes that had looked into thousands of audiences, still steady, still curious. She touched the window lightly. Cold glass, a small grounding sensation. Actors are trained to face imaginary worlds. Tonight the world was painfully real. A diagnosis, a future full of hospital corridors instead of film sets. Maybe treatments, maybe long mornings waiting for results. No applause there, no stage lights, just machines humming, doctors speaking in quiet rooms. She exhaled slowly. The breath fogged the glass for a moment, then disappeared, like everything does eventually. Across the street, someone turned on a television. Blue light flickered behind curtains. Some show, some story. Actors speaking lines written by someone else. Connie watched the faint glow. For years she had been inside those stories. Now she stood outside them. A strange feeling. Not painful. Just unfamiliar. She turned away from the window, walked back toward the couch, sat down again, hands resting loosely on her knees. A thought appeared suddenly. Simple, almost childish. What if this really is the last chapter of my acting? Not a grand farewell tour. Not a final performance with standing ovations. Just a quiet departure. Like someone leaving a room without interrupting the conversation. She considered that for a while. The idea didn't feel tragic, just real. Life rarely follows cinematic timing. Actors know that better than anyone. The greatest scenes in films often come with music swelling in the background. But real life happens without music, only breathing, and clocks ticking somewhere in the background. Tick, tick, tick. Connie leaned her head back. The ceiling above her looked plain tonight. White paint. A small shadow near the corner. Nothing dramatic. Yet somehow the room felt full. Full of years. Full of voices. Full of characters she had once carried inside her. Mothers. Grandmothers. Leaders. Women who fought. Women who forgave. Women who refused to disappear. All those voices had once lived inside her body. Borrowed for a few hours on stage. Then returned to silence. She wondered where they go. Characters. After the curtain falls. Do they simply fade? Or do they remain somewhere? Quietly. Waiting? The phone lit up again. Just for a moment. A notification. Then darkness. Connie didn't reach for it. Not this time. Instead, she sat there, still, listening to the quiet apartment, listening to the slow rhythm of night. And somewhere far away, in a theater she would probably never visit again. A curtain might be rising, while an audience leaned forward in their seats, waiting for a story to begin. Morning came quietly, not with drama, not with urgency, just light slipping slowly through the curtains, touching the edge of the wooden floor. Connie was already awake. She had been for a while. Sleep had come in fragments during the night, small pieces, drifting in and out like scenes cut from an unfinished film. The kettle clicked in the kitchen, water beginning to warm. She stood there for a moment, looking at the steam rising slowly from the spout. Simple things. Tea, morning light, the quiet rhythm of a home. These were things she had often missed during years of filming schedules and night rehearsals. Yet this morning felt different. The silence had weight. Her phone rested on the counter. Still there, still carrying the message from yesterday. Connie didn't open it again. There was no need. Some sentences remain in the mind long after the screen turns dark. Outside, the city was waking up. Johannesburg mornings always carry a kind of restless energy. Cars starting, radios turning on, a neighbor calling out to someone across the street. Life moving forward with the confidence of routine. She poured tea into a small cup, sat at the table. For a moment she watched the steam drift upward, thin, almost invisible, then gone. Her phone vibrated suddenly. A journalist. A small entertainment website. Someone she had spoken to once before, years ago, after a theater premiere. The message was polite. Careful. Worded gently. He had heard rumors that she might be stepping away from acting. Was it true? Would she like to say something? Connie read the message twice. Then she placed the phone down. The room stayed quiet. She finished her tea slowly. The taste felt stronger than usual. Maybe it always had. Maybe she had just never been still long enough to notice. Later that afternoon, she agreed to meet the journalist. Not a television interview. No cameras. Just a small cafe with wooden tables and wide windows. The kind of place where people talk softly. The journalist arrived early. Young. A little nervous. He had brought a small recorder, but kept it in his pocket at first. They spoke about ordinary things. Weather. Traffic. The new theater opening in Cape Town. For a while it felt like any other conversation. But eventually the young man asked the question. Carefully. Almost apologetically. Is it true you might be leaving acting? The cafe seemed to pause around them. A waiter passed quietly behind their table. Coffee cups clinked somewhere near the counter. Connie looked out the window. People walking past. Someone carrying flowers. A bus stopping at the corner. All those small movements. Life continuing without hesitation. She turned back toward the journalist. For a moment it looked like she might say something long, something reflective. Actors are good at that. Words. Stories. But she didn't. She simply smiled. A small, calm smile. Then she said, I think it's time for me to rest. That was all. No long explanation. No dramatic confession. Just one sentence. The journalist waited, pen hovering above his notebook. But Connie didn't add anything else. She sipped her coffee, looked outside again. The silence after her sentence felt surprisingly peaceful. Not awkward, not heavy, just complete. The journalist slowly nodded. He seemed to understand. Some moments don't need additional words. After a few minutes, they spoke again. About theater. About younger actors. About the way stories change with every generation. But that one sentence remained in the air. Simple. Honest. When they stood to leave, the journalist thanked her. Not just for the interview. For the years of work. The performances. The characters people had grown up watching. Connie waved it away gently. Actors never quite know how to accept gratitude like that. Outside the cafe, the afternoon sun had softened. Traffic moved slowly along the street. People hurried past without noticing the quiet moment that had just happened inside. No headlines yet. No announcements spreading across television. Just a conversation at a small table. And a sentence spoken softly enough that only one other person heard it clearly. I think it's time for me to rest. Connie walked down the sidewalk alone. The air felt warm. Somewhere nearby, music drifted out from a passing car. She passed a bookstore window. Stopped for a moment. Inside, people browsed quietly among shelves. Stories waiting to be opened. She stood there a few seconds, watching. thinking about how many stories she had stepped inside during her life. Hundreds, maybe more. Each one borrowed, each one eventually finished. The sky above Johannesburg had begun turning that pale gold color that appears just before evening. Shadows stretched longer along the pavement. Connie adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Then she continued walking. Behind her, in the small cafe, the young journalist finally pressed the record button and replayed the conversation, listening again to the quiet moment. When Connie Chiume had spoken a single sentence and then smiled, as if nothing else needed to be said. The apartment looked the same as yesterday. Same couch, same lamp, same quiet table near the window. But the morning carried a different rhythm. Connie opened a drawer beside the bookshelf. Inside were things she had not touched in years. Not trophies, not awards, just small things, fragments. She took out a thin folder first. A script, old. The paper had turned slightly yellow, the edges soft from being handled too many times. Across the front cover, someone had written the title in thick black marker. Underneath it, her name. Handwritten? Not by a designer. By a stage manager who used to write everyone's name like that, so scripts wouldn't get mixed up backstage. Connie flipped it open. The pages made that dry, rustling sound old paper always makes. Page 1, then page 2, then a note scribbled in the margin. Blue ink, her own handwriting. Small letters leaning slightly to the right. Pause here. She remembered writing that. During rehearsal, the director had said the line needed space. Give the audience a moment to breathe. So she wrote the note. Pause here. Years later, the ink had faded slightly, but the instruction was still there. Pause here. Connie closed the script halfway and ran her hand gently across the cover. Another memory surfaced. Not dramatic, just a rehearsal room. Plastic chairs, a metal fan turning slowly in the corner. Actors sitting in a circle reading lines out loud. Someone forgetting a page. Someone laughing too hard. The smell of dust and coffee. The beginning of a play. She set the script down. Next to it lay something else. A small makeup sponge inside a clear plastic box. It had hardened with age. She turned it over in her hand. Backstage rooms always looked chaotic. Lights around mirrors, lipsticks rolling across tables, brushes tangled together. But every actor knew exactly where their own things were. That sponge had followed her through dozens of productions. Theater, television, film, a quiet companion. She placed it back in the box. Another drawer, another small object. A badge from a film festival. The ribbon slightly wrinkled. She remembered that festival too. Not the speeches, not the awards. What she remembered was the moment after everything ended. People leaving the auditorium. Cameras gone. Lights dimmed. She had stayed behind a little longer, standing in the aisle, looking at the empty stage. Actors often do that. They linger, not because they're sad, because they understand how quickly a moment disappears. Connie smiled faintly. She moved to the shelf near the window. There, tucked between two framed photos, sat a small notebook. Brown cover, corners bent. She opened it. Inside were scattered notes. Not diaries, just reminders. Lines she liked. Ideas for characters. Little observations about people she had seen in markets or on buses. On one page, there was only a single sentence. Written quickly, almost hurried. Don't forget to breathe before walking on stage. She stared at that line for a moment. The memory returned instantly. Opening night. A play in Soweto, her heart beating faster than usual. She had written that sentence in the notebook just minutes before the curtain went up. A quiet instruction to herself. Don't forget to breathe. Actors pretend confidence. But backstage, everyone breathes a little deeper before stepping into the light. She ran her finger across the page. The paper felt fragile now. Time had softened everything. Across the room, the kettle clicked again. She had forgotten she'd turned it on earlier. Water beginning to boil. The sound filled the quiet apartment. A small domestic noise. Nothing theatrical about it. She poured another cup of tea, sat near the window again. On the table lay the script, the sponge, the notebook. 3 small objects, none of them impressive, none of them worthy of museum glass. But together, they carried years. Rehearsals, long nights, backstage whispers, lines repeated until they felt real. The city outside moved as usual. Buses, footsteps, someone calling across the street. Connie lifted the script again. A loose page slipped out and landed softly on the floor. She bent down to pick it up. At the bottom of the page, another small note appeared. Written by someone else this time. Probably the director. Just 3 words. "Stay longer here." She laughed quietly. Actors always received notes like that. "Stay longer. Speak softer. Look left. Wait before answering." Tiny instructions shaping an entire performance. She placed the page back carefully. The script closed with a soft thud. The room settled again. The kettle's heat faded. Steam disappeared. Outside, the afternoon had begun sliding slowly toward evening. Connie leaned back in her chair, looking at the small objects on the table. A script, a sponge, a notebook. Nothing extraordinary, yet each one carried a moment where life had felt intensely alive. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn echoed briefly, then faded. Connie rested her hand lightly on the notebook, her thumb touching the edge of the page where the old sentence still waited. "Don't forget to breathe." The words sat there quietly, patient, like they had been waiting for her to read them again. Evening, not late yet, just the hour when the sky begins to soften and streetlights start blinking awake one by one. Across the city, a small cinema stands between 2 old buildings. The sign above the door still works, though one letter flickers every few seconds. Inside the glass display case near the entrance, there are several posters. Bright colors, new films, action scenes, explosions. But in the corner of the display case, slightly tilted, there is an older poster. The paper is beginning to curl at the edges. A younger Connie Chiume stands in the center of it, her expression calm, confident. The colors have faded just a little from years of sunlight through the glass. No one has removed it. No one has replaced it. It simply remains there. The cinema doors open. 2 teenagers walk in, laughing. They don't notice the poster. The ticket seller inside tears 2 small stubs and points toward the hallway. A film is starting in Theater 2. Down the corridor, someone sweeps the floor slowly with a wide broom. Dust gathers near the walls. At the end of the hallway, a projector begins to hum. A beam of light cuts through the darkness inside the screening room. The audience sits quietly. Popcorn. Soft whispers. A film begins, but not the one on that old poster. Outside the cinema, the street grows darker. A bus passes, headlights sliding across the glass case for just a moment. The light touches Connie's image on the poster, then disappears again. Across the city, in Soweto, a small theater stands behind a row of shops. The sign outside still reads tonight's performance. Letters arranged by hand. Inside, the stage lights are warming up. Soft amber. A stage manager walks across the floor counting steps. 1, 2, 3. Checking distances. The curtain hangs quietly. In the wings, someone adjusts a microphone stand. An actor rehearses lines under their breath. Backstage mirrors glow with rows of bulbs. Costumes hang neatly on metal racks. One empty hanger swings slightly. The movement is small, barely noticeable. A door opens. Someone walks through carrying a stack of scripts. They place them on a wooden chair. One of the scripts slides off the pile and lands softly on the floor. No one picks it up immediately. On the front cover of that script, there is a familiar name. Later, the rehearsal begins. Actors move across the stage. Dialogue echoes through the empty seats. In the back row, a single notebook rests on a chair, its pages open. A pen lying across the center crease. Someone must have left it there earlier. Outside, night settles deeper over Johannesburg. Street vendors pack up their tables, metal legs folding, plastic bags rustling. The fruit stand that stood bright in the afternoon now disappears piece by piece. Across the street, a television glows behind thin curtains. A scene plays, actors arguing, dramatic music rising. But in the quiet living room where Connie sits tonight, the television remains off. The lamp near the couch casts a soft circle of light. On the table, a script rests beside a notebook. The same notebook with the small handwritten line. "Don't forget to breathe." The page has not moved. The kettle sits cold now on the counter. No steam, no sound. Connie sits near the window, not speaking. The city lights outside reflect faintly in the glass. Cars pass occasionally, each one leaving a brief streak of light across the room. Then darkness again. On the bookshelf, a photograph stands between two awards. A younger Connie on stage, arms slightly raised. The background filled with blurred faces of an audience. The photograph tilts a little. Perhaps someone touched the frame earlier. Or perhaps it has leaned like that for years. No one adjusts it. Outside the window, the wind moves through the trees, leaves brushing softly against one another. The sound barely reaches inside. On the table, the phone lights up briefly. A message. Then the screen fades again. Across the city, the small cinema continues its evening show. Inside the projection booth, the film reels spin steadily. Light flickers across the screen. Rows of people sit quietly in the dark. Some lean forward. Some check their phones. In the glass display case outside, the old poster remains, a corner lifting slightly from the surface. Tape holding it in place. The flickering letter on the cinema sign outside blinks again. Once, then twice. Then steady light. Back in the apartment. The lamp hums softly. The notebook stays open on the table. The sentence still visible in faded ink. Don't forget to breathe. Connie's hand rests nearby, not touching the page, just close enough that the edge of the paper moves slightly whenever the night air slips through the half-open window. Night. Johannesburg grows quieter after midnight. Not silent, never completely silent. But the sounds stretch farther apart. A car passing, then nothing. A dog barking somewhere far away. Then stillness again. Inside a theater near the edge of the city, the last rehearsal finished an hour ago. The actors left slowly. First the younger ones, laughing, talking about tomorrow. Then the stage manager, carrying a clipboard, turning off lights along the hallway. Click, click, click. The dressing rooms emptied one by one. Mirrors still glowing for a few minutes after everyone had gone. Lipstick left on a table. A brush resting beside a half-open makeup bag. A chair pushed slightly away from the mirror, as if someone had stood up quickly. The backstage door closed softly. The building settled. Only the stage lights remained. Soft amber, warming the empty space. At the center of the stage, a single wooden chair stands. Not elegant, just simple theater furniture. The kind that has appeared in dozens of plays. Someone placed it there during rehearsal earlier. It was part of a scene. A quiet scene. A woman sitting alone under a dim light, listening to something only she could hear. During rehearsal, the director asked the actor to try the moment again. "Sit longer," he said. "Let the silence breathe." So the chair stayed there. After rehearsal ended, no one moved it. The curtain is open tonight. The seats in the audience remain empty. Rows and rows of red fabric chairs. Still, patient, waiting. A faint hum comes from the lighting system above. Electricity flowing quietly through cables and metal frames. Dust floats slowly through the beam of light over the stage. Tiny particles drifting, almost invisible. In the front row, a program booklet lies on the floor. Perhaps someone dropped it earlier. The page is slightly bent. When the air shifts, one corner lifts, then falls again. Outside the theater, the street lamp flickers once, then steadies. Across the road, a bus stop sits empty. A plastic advertisement panel glows faintly under fluorescent light. No one waiting. No footsteps. The city continues somewhere beyond the buildings. Distant traffic murmuring like faraway waves. Inside the theater, the chair remains exactly where it was placed. Center stage, under the warm light. Backstage, the corridors are dark now. Doors closed. Costume racks still. Scripts resting in quiet piles. One script lies open on a table. Pages spread flat. On the margin of a page, there is a note written in blue ink. Pause here. The ink has faded slightly, but the words are still readable. Pause here. The stage lights hum softly overhead. No music. No dialogue. Just the faint sound of electricity and empty space. Hours pass. The building breathes slowly. Wood contracting. Metal cooling. Somewhere backstage, a curtain rope sways gently. The movement small. barely enough to notice. On the stage, the chair does not move. Its shadow stretches long across the wooden floor. Then shorter, then longer again as the lights dim slightly with the building's night cycle. Outside the theater, clouds move slowly across the sky, moonlight slipping between them. Across the city, windows go dark one by one. People sleeping, apartments quiet. In a small living room somewhere else in Johannesburg, a lamp has already been turned off. A notebook remains open on a table, one page visible. Don't forget to breathe. The window beside the table is slightly open, night air moving gently through the room. The page lifts, falls, lifts again. Back at the theater, the stage remains exactly the same. Curtain open, lights on, empty audience seats watching quietly. And at the center of the stage, the wooden chair, still waiting, under the soft amber light.